I got asked by a former client on how to apologize. And I have lots of thoughts on this. And we'll go from simple and basic to the proper application of real life context, because there's the ideal version of handling this conversation, the basic version of handling this conversation, but the reality of how it goes, maybe people do need a lot more help with that idea. To me, it feels very basic, but getting lost in the sauce on the steps, the procedure of how to apologize, I don't want to focus too much on that. Back in the day, Randy Pausch, rest in peace, Carnegie Mellon professor, he had a book called The Last Lecture because it was based on his lecture he called The Last Lecture. At this time, this is like right before TED Talks were really taking off, sort of around the same time period, but think of it more or less like a TED Talk, okay? He broke down a good apology into 3 parts, essentially saying, I'm sorry, admitting fault, I was wrong, and then supplementing it with, how can I fix this? How can I make it better? How can I make it up to you? Basically. So again, the very words, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and you can detail what mistake you did specifically, and then asking for, not retribution, that's not the right word right there, but how to rectify the situation, okay? And on paper, it's not a bad formula, but it really depends on who you're dealing with and what kind of mistake you did, okay? Because if you're dealing with someone who loves you, who is ready to forgive you, and you're just like dancing around the conversation because it's awkward, get out of the way. Tell them you're sorry, like fess up to your mistakes. Like, I think there's a very immature elementary side to this, and hey, you have to start somewhere. A lot of adults that we know now are definitely stunted and immature. So yeah, maybe it's very helpful to learn these steps. I guess I should just jump straight into it. When I hear someone who asks, how do I apologize? How do I say I'm sorry? I don't think that's the real question that they're trying to ask. I think when someone asks that, what they're really wanting to know is, how can I get this person to forgive me? And that's a completely separate and different thing, because there's no guarantee. There's no magic word to force or make someone forgive you. We can talk about don't do the asshole apology. So Randy Pausch's 3-step points. I'm sorry, I was wrong. How can I make it up to you? That's not a bad formula, because it keeps you away from saying, well, I'm sorry you were offended. I'm sorry you felt like I disrespected you. That's not a sincere apology, because you're taking their emotion and you're dismissing it, and you're almost like flipping it back on them, blaming the person, Is it possible, depending on the interaction, you think they're making a big deal out of nothing? It could be. But if your sincere question is, how do I apologize? It's all about meeting middle ground, right? And that's another one of my tangent soapbox points I have with some of my friends. Not me versus them, but we're in agreement that arguing culture these days is so hot button issue, picking sides, that it's always about getting one leg up over someone else. It's about winning. And like the real winning, or winning in a lot of people's eyes, is as long as that person loses, then I win, even if you're losing. So it sucks. So much terminology loses its impact because it's overused. Like I want to say, like, that truly is toxic, and it is. But just hearing like these are toxic habits, this is a toxic argument, this is a toxic way of speaking, I think it just like bounces off people at this point because they overhear it. So along those lines, over apologizing, being so sorry, I think it's a good consideration to have. There was, I think the movie's called Love Story. It's really melodramatic. The 2 pop culture points from that movie were the soundtrack, great soundtrack, one of the best melodramatic love songs of all time, in my opinion, next to Winter Sonata, the Korean drama. But the other quote is, love means never having to say you're sorry. Okay. Love means never having to say you're sorry. And I remember doing a podcast with a friend way back when, and he thought it was the stupidest quote because of course you should be apologizing. Of course you should be saying you're sorry. And it's not that I disagree, but I felt like there was a certain layer in that quote when you really build bonds with people and like you have true understanding. Again, you don't want to assume, but when you have real, true bonds and understanding with a person, they will know when you feel bad. They will know when like, oh, okay, like they are being apologetic, nonverbal cues, that type of stuff, and wanting to make things up, where you don't want to focus so much on the words. Like if you've never said, I'm sorry in your life, you've never ever been aware to fess up to the mistakes that you've made directly, you should be doing that. But if you are focusing so much on those first 2 points, oh, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, like, oh, what have I done? I always screw this up. Like you're still kind of only making it about you. You're not worrying about mending that bridge. I don't know why this is the gesture for mending the bridge, but you know what I mean, right? How to make things better. And sometimes making things better needs time. We're getting into some like muddled gray territory here about assuming or not assuming, but this is why you can't really just stick with a formula, okay? So if you're trying to apologize for something that you don't even know what you did or you know what the problem is, you need to have more discussion and conversation about that. What exactly happened? Do you know where things went wrong, or do you still have no idea? And like, do you feel forced where you have to do this formula of apologizing? Because if you're going through the motions without really knowing what's going on, that's not going to be good either, no matter how friendly or step by step your apology might be. Like, this is part of the reason why all those PR celebrity apologies suck. And like 99% people, I think, know they're full of crap on that. Maybe what I can say about the assumptions, right, is you don't want to assume how people will feel, but what might help, even if you are unsure with how to articulate your thoughts in words, is if you really do believe this is one of your true friends or someone that you could repair things with, you can go with a little bit of that optimism that you can be vulnerable with this person. It's okay to stumble with my words because you are stumbling towards rebuilding that bridge. I will encourage people, a phone call or in person, like having the actual dialogue is going to be the way to go, because you could text it all out these days. Don't do it, but I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people are trying to craft up their apologies on ChatGPT or any kind of AI assisted tool, Grammarly, that type of stuff. Details verbally with the stumbles, with the ums, the uhs, and stutters goes a much longer way than just carefully crafted essay text. Because what do we know? Like, even someone who's trying to listen, they're going to miss stuff. And we also know that people don't really listen. But people's propensity to read is even lower on the floor. I don't know if I'm getting to going off on a tangent here. I'm not trying to just like smack talk people, but what I will say, any good relationship, not just romantic, business, social, friendship wise, you need both people to be kind of in it. So let's say you did something that is minor, but the other person, they took it in the absolute worst way possible. Is it possible to mend that bridge with a good apology? That's where I would say not always. Like, you need the other person who's kind of invested in it also. And if they're not, it sucks. I've had certain friendships die over smaller things like that. But you can't be only person in that dynamic who's like carrying the torch and like trying to make things work, because that's when you're going to burn yourself out and get resentful also. This went in a couple more detailed directions than I thought it would go. So we'll see what it's like when I cut it up and put it up on YouTube there. But the most important thing is just having the real conversation and dialogue around it. Don't think that an apology is a formula to forgiveness, because that is a separate point entirely. So that's where we're going to close it there.